this Sunday and next Sunday, we're going to share with you I'm going to share with you my story this morning. I entitled the message, My Story, His Story, Your Story. My story is how I came to know Jesus personally, how he became the forgiver of my sins and the leader of my life. His story is me being able to tell people the story of Jesus. Me being able to tell somebody how they can ask Jesus to come into their heart and forgive their sins and lead their life. I don't have to know everything. I just need to know enough. And I have learned through the years how to do that. My story, his story, and the third part, you always make a sermon 3 points, is your story. Every one of us, if we have a relationship with Jesus, we have a story. It's not, do you have a story? It's, you have a story. Have you ever told it to somebody you work with? I'm helping in a little country church over in Ohio right now. And last Sunday, we did a baptism, and this guy was a fireman. And they were talking about how he came to know the Lord. And it was through one of my guys in my churches meeting him out in public, and they began to talk, and over a period of time, my guy telling him his story, and then he accepted Christ, and he was baptized last Sunday. So all of us have a story. If you're a Christian, your story's got 3 parts. Your life before you knew Jesus, specifically how you came to know Jesus, and third, what difference has he made in your life? Your life before Christ, specifically how you came to know him, and the difference that he's made in your life. For example, in all of our lives, there have been relationships where at one time or another, we could tell people that our story, and God will use you as a link in a chain that maybe causes somebody at some point to become a Christian themselves. I mean, think about the links in the chain for your experience of coming to know Christ. For instance, in my chain would be my parents, would be a football coach, would have been elementary school teachers that were Christians, a coach, some of my buddies, but none of them were the person that actually had me bow my head and accept Christ. All I'm saying with your story is you could be a link. You could be the first link, or you could be the link that somebody bows their head and asks Jesus in their heart with you. All of us have a story, but you got to be ready, willing, and able, and looking for those chances to share your faith. Think for just a second about the people that were chain linkers in your life. You know, nobody just heard it one time from one person and accepted Christ. Everybody has that chain effect. At least I think so. Acts 1:9 says, but Jesus is telling them right before he goes back to heaven, you're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, and Samaria, and to the end of the earth. Well, you won't be if you don't tell your story. You won't be if at some point you don't tell people what Jesus means to you. For example, the woman at the well, I love how it tells her story of she goes out to get water and she meets Jesus at the well, and Jesus tells her about her life, that she's been with 4 or 5 different men, and the man she's with now she's not married to, and then they talk back and forth, and then she recognizes Jesus is who he said he was, the Messiah, and she runs back in town, and in John 4:39 it says, many of the Samaritans from the town believed in Jesus because of the woman's testimony or story, or whatever your version says. Many of the people believe because of your story. I watched, my son play the drums, and my other son preaches, and my third son just went downstairs. And I look back over my life, and I'm kind of chasing a rabbit right here, just for a second. I thought some things were so important when they were young, like sports, and that was great. But all I care is that all three of my boys know Jesus and I'm going to spend eternity with them. Nothing else matters. I so remember when I was a youth minister and I was in Huntington and I was at the county championship of wrestling. And this kid's dad screams down to him when he gets ready to wrestle, whatever his name was. Let's say it was John. John, this is the most important thing you'll ever do in your life. And I look over at him like, are you kidding me? But he, his dad thought that. That was probably 30 years ago, and I wonder what he thinks now. How about the man that was blind and the story that Jesus gives him back his sight? Remember his story? In John 9, I think it's 25, he's being questioned by the religious leaders, the Pharisees. And they say, what do you think about this Jesus? And he talks back and forth. And then he finally says, they pressure him and he says, whether he's a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I do know, I was blind and now I can see. That's part of my story. Not physically blind, but my life was kind of screwed up and Jesus turned it around. There is only one major motivation for telling your story. One major motivation, and that would be love. It would be after what Jesus has done for me, there ain't nothing I wouldn't do for him. After the change he's made in my life, obviously going to the cross, there's nothing I wouldn't do for him. I'm going to tell people about him. Today, just for a few minutes, somebody said to me after the first service, I'm an old guy. My story's long if I told you the whole story. So I've got to do my best not to ramble, and I got to do my best to say what's most important for you to hear today, and only God can help me do that. I challenge you sometime in the next week or so to go home and write out in a page or two your story. Your life before Jesus, specifically how you came to know him, and any difference that he's made in your life. And do it in a page or a page and a half, because most of the time, somebody ain't going to sit and listen to you for 30 minutes telling your story, but they'll listen for a couple of minutes, 3 minutes. Well, I'm going to go more than 3 minutes with my story. But I could tell you my story in 3 minutes. I worked on it, so I'd be able to do it with people I run into. But here's just a little bit of my story. I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up in a Leave It to Beaver kind of family. We ate at the table. I never heard my mom and dad cuss. I had 2 brothers. I'm the oldest. Life was great until my mom came to me when I was 5 years old and said, tomorrow, you're going to kindergarten. I specifically remember I was watching Mr. Cartoon, and I said, Mom, no, I'm not. I don't want to go to kindergarten. I'm happy staying in my pajamas all day long. Don't want to go to kindergarten. But you'll learn to read and write and color, and you'll make friends. You'll love kindergarten. No, I won't. Well, you're going anyway. So I go to kindergarten, and the things that I remember most is I cried every day at kindergarten. I literally cried every day. I remember everything was on the floor. We had chairs, but for some stupid reason, we always sat in a circle on the floor. And you looked around at those kids, and they all looked little pointed heads. I don't know why I thought their heads were pointed, but they all looked like little pointed heads, and kindergarten's where I first time I had to go to the bathroom. So I get up to go to the bathroom. Oh, David, you have to raise your hand if you want to go to the bathroom. And when I'm watching Mr. Cartoon, I just get up and go to the bathroom. Do I have to hold up a 1 or 2? Kindergarten was not for me. I cried every day till I quit. My mother finally pulled me out of kindergarten. When I was in kindergarten, it was an option, so I made it an option. I'm not going. A year passed, and my mother said, "You got to go to first grade." Is it optional? No, it's not optional. I went to first grade, and the thing that scared me the most the first day was I had to find my bus after school, and it looked like there were 75 million buses lined up down through there. And they said, "Well, it's easy. All you got to do is find number 75. Well, that's great, but I don't know what a 75 is. And I just thought, I'll get lost, and I will be at this school till I'm 35 years old, looking for a 75. I remember we had to learn to read. See Jane run, 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 run. Remember those? See Dick run, 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 run. Spot. I named my dog Spot because of that. First grade was just, I had to learn to write inside the lines. The lines were that far apart, but I still had a rough time doing it. The pencils were that long. They had no eraser on them either. I don't know why. I guess teacher wanted to see if you could mess up. But I remember I had to learn to write my name, and I laid it on my shoulder, laid the pencil on my shoulder, and I wrote D-A, held my hand up. She thought I had to go to the bathroom. No, that wasn't it. I need another piece of paper to finish out my name here. And you got to get all David on one sheet of paper. You're kidding me. That ought to be like the 11th grade. Not the first grade. A little later I learned to do that, but school, playground, I didn't like going out on the playground. There were all kinds of weird people on the playground. I had this guy that sat beside me, always tied girls' hair to the back of the chair, and just weird things. And it was just not a pleasant experience. School wasn't for me. The homecoming dance the kids went to this Friday, I have horrible memories of homecoming dance. And when I was in, this was the 6th grade. I don't even think it was a homecoming dance. It was just a school dance. And all the girls are on this side in the gym, and all the guys are on this side. And they start dancing. Nobody dances. A couple girls dance with each other. A couple guys don't, but nobody dances. Finally, the gym teacher, he goes, "Ladies' choice." And girls just, they don't care. They have no shame at all. They all start across the gym floor towards us. And I like this girl named Linda Hastings, but it wasn't Linda Hastings coming towards me. In my memory, she had one eye right in the center of her head. She weighed about 280. She was coming right towards me. Well, that's not true, but the truth is all of us guys, at the same time, we did the thing that girls usually do. We all took off to the bathroom as the girls came across. And my gym teacher, Mr. Cummings, he still remembers us doing that. And he came to the gym or the bathroom door and made all of us march out there and dance with those girls, However, I have no rhythm like my son. It was not a pleasant experience. So whenever I hear homecomings, and it just scares me to death. My 2 problems before I became a Christian was, number 1, I feared death. I don't know why. I was young, but I feared dying, but I mainly feared my parents leaving me, or my grandparents, or aunts or uncles, because I was real close to my family. I feared death. And the other thing about me in elementary school was I had no self-confidence, 0 self-confidence. I'll just leave it at that. Junior high hit, and I could tell you funny things in junior high too, but I won't. Hit the 8th grade, around the 8th grade, and my grandmother died. She lived next door, and she passed away real sudden, and it was the first funeral home I'd ever gone to. I'm 8th grade, 7th grade, or 8th. And I go to the funeral home, and as I kind of listen, the people are talking. Some of them are even laughing, and I thought, that's awful. My grandma's dead, and you're laughing. But I get it better now as I got older. But they kept saying, my grandmother's name was Grace, and they kept saying, oh, Grace is in a better place. Grace is with Jesus now. Grace is with the Lord. Grace is with God. Grace is in heaven. And as I walked around the funeral home, I thought, I go to youth group. I go to church. I, do all the stuff with my parents at church. How do they know she's in heaven? How do they know? Are they just trying to make everybody feel better? That was the first thing that hit me that made me think, well, is it going to church, being a Christian? I don't know if it is or not. My grandmother died. 6 months later, we have a revival at our church, and my dad picked up the evangelist at the airport. And driving back, the evangelist, I'm sitting in the back seat, and the evangelist says to my dad something like, Harold, do you know anybody you could invite to church that doesn't know the Lord or is not a Christian? I don't even remember what my dad said because I'm sitting there thinking in the back seat, I don't know Jesus. I don't guess I'm a Christian. And I even got teary-eyed. I go to church, I sing in the youth choir, I listen, but I don't know if I'm a Christian or not. Well, during the course of that week, every night, the Holy Spirit put on me, you need forgiveness for your sin. I love you. The Holy Spirit didn't make me feel stupid or you're worthless. You need Jesus. It convicted me of my sin that was separating me from God. And to make a long story short, about 3 nights in, finally I came forward at the invitation. And before God, I cannot tell you I remember praying. I don't. But remember I said in your story, here's how I tell people, how I'm specific with them. I say, I don't remember praying, but I must have prayed to ask Jesus, invited him into my heart to forgive my sins and lead my life. And the reason I know I did that was because from that day to this day, and I'm not bragging, it's just been true for me. I have never doubted that I was a Christian, that I was saved. A lot of people do have doubts. I don't know if it's good parents, my preacher, the Holy Spirit, I don't know. But I have never doubted that I was saved. Here's what I've doubted from age 8th grade to now. I've doubted I've been a very good Christian lots of times. And there's a big difference. I remember getting baptized, after the revival. I don't know if it's 3 weeks later, 6 months later, but all of a sudden God started helping me with those 2 areas that I had feared before. The one was death. I feared death no more. I've never feared death since. I don't know. It's almost supernatural. I don't like going to funerals. I don't like doing funerals, but I did my mom and dad's funeral, all my aunts and uncles, and funerals were not death. God's helped me deal with that. The other thing is my self-confidence. About 6 months after I became a Christian, football came into my life. And that doesn't sound very spiritual, but it was the first thing I was ever pretty good at. I was not good in school, but I was this size in the 8th grade. I was 6'2". Well, I may have weighed a little less than I weigh now, like 30 pounds, but I still weighed a lot. So I was automatically pretty daggone good. And I was a new Christian. I was in the 8th grade, and junior high went 7th, 8th, and 9th then. And I was on the football team, and we won our first game, won our second game, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Never lost a game till the last game of the year, and we played Kamak Junior High. And we went down to Kamak, and I was tying my shoe on the sideline. And I just started understanding I can pray and talk to the Lord anytime, not just at church or not just at night. So I'm tying my shoe. I remember this from 50 years ago. And I said, Dear Jesus, something like this. And I don't know if this is theologically sound or not. I'm just telling you it happened. I said, Jesus, help me to be a good athlete, and I will tell people about you. I will be a good witness for you. First quarter, no score. Second quarter, I'm the defensive end. And the quarterback for their team dropped back for a pass. And I looked in his eyes and I could see he was going to throw a screen to the offensive end. So I just stood there. When he pitched it over, I intercepted it. And I ran to the goal line, and there was no goalpost. So I ran clear to the car that had brought us to the football game and back. We missed the extra point at 6-0. I didn't tell this in the first service, but I'm on the sideline so dang excited. I'd never even touched a football. I was a fat lineman, you know. And now it's 6-0, and they're hollering for the kickoff team. Kickoff team, kickoff team. I was on the kickoff team, but I was so excited I didn't run out there. Finally, the coach said, Easter. So I go out, and I'm standing there waiting for the kickoff, and the referee comes over to me and says, where's your mouthpiece? And I'd lost it in all my excitement. He said, get a mouthpiece. So the manager comes out. He doesn't have one. So my best friend, whose name's John Bale, he's on the sidelines. He goes, here, you can use mine. So I run back out that mouthpiece. I'm holding it in my hand, and I'm thinking, I'll just hold it. And the referee looks at me and says, put it in your mouth. And again, this is 50 years ago. I still remember what it tasted like. I still remember the temperature of it, that it was warm. Warm, wet, and wild. John we were saliva buddies after that instead of blood brothers. We won the game 6-0, didn't score again. Next day, my first time my name had ever been in the sports page, it was an article about like this. It said, it's Easter in October in Milton. And then it tells this article about I scored the touchdown. And the Lord reminded me, or I remembered, how I said I would give him glory and I thought, it's just a coincidence. 9th grade rolled around, I was captain of the team. We won the county again. 10th grade rolled around, 11th grade. After my 11th grade, and before God, I was not that good of an athlete. I truly believe God did this. After my junior year, we were practicing football or basketball, and this guy comes in and says, the All-State just came out. Your first team AAA All-State. And I thought, I just couldn't believe it. And that same year in Sports Illustrated, I made third team All-American when I was a junior in high school. And I go back to tying my shoes in the 8th grade, and I forgot to tell this in the first service. I got so frustrated, but after I graduated high school, and for the next 10 years after that, God used me in schools because I'd been an athlete. Not anymore, because I'm an old man and they don't care anymore, but for 10 or 15, maybe 20 years, I've been at PHS and Spoke, Parkersburg South and Spoke, Williamstown, Greenbrier East, Greenbrier West, Brook, Huntington High, Huntington East, Barbersville, Milton, Cabell Midland, just on and on and on. These Fellowship Christian athletes would invite me to come and speak to the school. You can't do that anymore. And I truly believe it all started when I was tying my shoe in the 8th grade and said, Lord, help me be a good athlete, and I'll give you the glory. When I was 14 years old, I was at a Christian movie. And at that movie, I'll just say it real quick, I felt the Lord call me into ministry. And I sat back there and I got teary-eyed. Movies down, darkness, nobody saw me. But I just heard the Lord say to me, I want you to be a youth minister. And I went home and I didn't tell my mom and dad. I didn't tell anybody. And the next 2 or 3 years of high school, my priorities were girls, cars, or sports and cars. And then the Lord was fourth in there. And I went to youth group, and I didn't do anything terribly stupid, but God was not number one in my life. I graduate from high school. I supernaturally get this full scholarship to this Christian college. And that summer, before I was to leave to go play ball in August, I worked out with this buddy of mine. I worked in a lumber yard, and then at 5, we'd meet at the high school and lift weights and run. And every day we do that, he would say to me, why don't you go to Marshall with me? Why don't you just decide to go? He was already a sophomore at Marshall, and we'd played ball together in high school. Now, he was always kind of my hero. He was 2 years older than me. And I kept saying, well, I kept hearing the Lord say to me, tell him why you miraculously got this scholarship. Tell him about me. And I didn't have the guts to do it. I just, no better, easier way to say it, or I didn't have the guts. And every day he'd talk about, go to Marshall with me. I'm in a fraternity. I can get you this, and we can do that. Come on, go to Marshall with me. The last day we worked out, we showered at the school. He said, I want to take you home. And he said, I got a new car. And he had a new Mach 1 Mustang. And we got in the car, and I heard the Lord say to me, tell him about me, whatever that meant. Just tell him you got this scholarship and you're a Christian. And basically, when he would ask me why, I would lie to him. I'd say, I want to get out of this little town. I want to get away from my girlfriend. I want to get away from my parents. All those were lies where I just needed to tell him, but I just didn't have the guts to tell him my story. He takes me home that day. He sticks his head out the window at some point to blow dry his hair, and he looks over at me and he says, I'm going to ask you one more time, go to Marshall with me. And one more time I had a chance to tell him about Jesus, and I didn't. He goes to Marshall, I go to Wheaton. November 14th, 1970, we played Augustana College. We got beat 14-12. The quarterback for Augustana was Kenny Anderson. He ended up being the quarterback for the Bengals later on. And we were in the dorm, and I was beat up and tired, and it was 20-10. I was in my dorm room, and it came across the bottom of the screen, plane crash in West Virginia. Football team, and my first initial thought, it could only be West Virginia or Marshall because nobody else traveled by plane. And then it comes and it's Marshall. And I thought, well, my buddy wasn't on the plane. I called home, and Mom said, well, we don't know. And the next morning, everybody died. Everybody who's on the plane died. And I sat down in my dorm, and I said, Lord, I need to get home and go to his funeral. And I've never heard God speak audibly, but as close to audibly, I heard the Lord say to me, David, what good's it going to do now? What are you going to do, walk up to the casket and tell him what I told you to tell him in the summer? Now, I don't know if he was a Christian or not. Maybe he was, but I know what I was supposed to do, and I didn't do it. I didn't go to the funeral. My parents couldn't afford me to go to fly me back home, but I was in the dorm that morning. It was Saturday, and I remember thinking I should have, and I didn't. And then it hit me. I said to the Lord, okay, Lord, you told me when I was 14 to go into ministry. I will, and I'll tell people about it. So I called my mom and dad, and I told them. I came home for Christmas, went back to Wheaton and stayed 2 weeks, quit, went back to Marshall, tried to play football, but the program was so messed up in February that they didn't even have a coach or nothing at that point. So I went to my preacher and I said, I feel like God's called me into ministry. And he said, well, I can get you a job in a church this summer. I said, I don't want to do that by myself. And he said, well, Mike, your buddy's thinking about the ministry too. So we did summer youth ministry that summer at Point Pleasant. It was an awesome experience. Next summer, they asked us back. My buddy didn't want to go. In fact, now he's a corporate lawyer in Columbus and a billionaire. And he can't be as happy as I am, or any happier than I am, in the direction the Lord took my life. I went back that summer, and then they asked me to go back and go to Marshall and live there. And so all through college, I worked in that little church as a youth minister. I graduate college, and I get a call from North Parkersburg Baptist. The pastor there had been my summer youth minister, and he asked me if I'd interview for the job. And I came up, and I was overwhelmed looking at I remember this big board room and all these chairs and these people, and I'm thinking, dear God, I can't do this. All my life, I've kind of been an excuse maker. Don't make excuses to the Lord. If he tells you to do something, do it. Well, in the end, I ended up going, and that's where I met my wife. And that's where I had 8 years that were wonderful there. Then the Lord took me to Huntington, where I was able to go back to Marshall area. And I was a college minister in the high school, junior high in a church. And when I was there, it's when Cody was born and Luke was born. And I had a fabulous experience at Highline. In 1990, 89, I was at a conference on leadership. And again, I heard God speak to me, not audibly, but I mean, as clear as a bell. I was filling in the blanks. And he says to me, David, put your pencil down. I want you to go into ministry now. I want you to be a pastor. You're not going to be a youth pastor anymore. And the tears just started flowing. I was in a room where there was nothing emotional being said. It was fill in the blank kind of leadership stuff. So I get up and I left the room and went up to my motel room, and the guy that was with me came up and said, what's the matter? And I said, I just heard the Lord tell me I'm supposed to go into ministry, or I'm supposed to be a pastor now. I go home, I tell Lisa. 2 weeks later, the pastor at the church, and I said, Lord, what do I do now? And I just didn't do anything. I just told my wife. 2 weeks later, the pastor resigns at this church I was at Highline. And they asked me to be the interim. And it was a church of about 1,000. And we were there 6 or 8 months, and I was the interim, and it was a fabulous experience. They call a pastor. In my memory, a week later, this pulpit committee comes, and they're sitting in there listening to me. And they come up to me afterwards and say, we're from Williamstown. We're from First Baptist Williamstown. Would you talk to us about being our pastor? And Lisa and I came up here, and Luke and Cody were just little. And I can remember thinking, I'm ashamed to say this, but I remember walking in the sanctuary. It was a brand new sanctuary then. I can remember thinking, I could do better than this. This church seats about 120 people, if that. And I'd been preaching to 1,000. And then the Lord just broke my heart and told me, that's where I want you. We moved to Williamstown. I was there 6 years, and it was Lisa's favorite experience of her life, my wife. It was just, the church tripled in size, money quadrupled in size. It just was, we went from 1 service to 2 services to 3 services. And then right when I was getting comfortable, I get a call from Indiana. Somebody giving my name to a church in Indiana. And Lisa and I fly down there and rent a car, and we drove in front of the church. I'd never even been to Indiana. And the church was being built. The old downtown church, they were moving to on the interstate. And it was, at that time, it was $3.5 million in 95, and it was a fabulous church. And I stopped the car on the interstate, and I got out, and I thought, I can't do this. I can't do this, Lord. How do you pay off a $3.5 million building debt? I don't know. Make a long story short again, I ended up doing it, and it was brutal on my boys to move. And I told him in the first service, this is a little side note for you. When God tells you to do something, sometimes, not always, but it is costly to you to do it, but it's also costly to those around you. It was terribly costly to my wife to go to Indiana. She didn't want to be away from her family. I didn't really. My dad had just died 6 months before. But I knew it's what the Lord wanted us to do. So we're there 7 or 8 years, and it was fabulous. And I mean, it had ups and downs, but it was a fabulous experience. And then the Lord brings us back here. And then I had a bunch of health problems. I had open heart surgery and just some other health problems. And I was at the church 5 years, and I resigned. And since then, it wasn't a month later, Luke starts this church. Luke and Eric. And I've been a part of that process, and I've been helping in little churches ever since. But what I just want to tell you, or I want you to go home thinking about, is that you have a story. And if you don't, then you need to come to know Jesus personally. And if you do, I just want to challenge you to put it on paper. I'm not saying you'll read it to somebody. It may just be for you to put on paper. Before you knew Jesus, when you came to know him, and any difference. He's made a zillion differences in my life, but two I pick out is the fear of death, and he gave me the confidence over the years that I didn't have before. There's lots of other things too, but those are two that I remember the highest. Don't wait till it's too late. Just if you want to put your life on simple terms, it's just what Jesus asked Jesus, what's the most important commandment? And he said, love God and love people. Your kids' athletics are important, and athletics made a big difference in my life. But I have never done a teenager's funeral where they said, my son was a great basketball player or a great football player. All they wanted to know was, did their son know Jesus? You got to tell me. I can't tell you. And I've had it both ways. And it is brutal. So anyway, just tell your story and start it with your family. Let's pray.